If you've ever felt like your life's gone a little off course, like maybe you were destined to revolutionize the world, but instead you're feeding birds in a park and promising to build a death ray, then congratulations, you and Nikola Tesla would have gotten along just fine. Welcome, dear dreamer, to the quiet end of the electric age, where genius meets pigeons, and destiny hums faintly under the static of an aging inventor's last experiments. Tonight's story is about a man who once electrified cities, and then years later, fell in love with a bird and tried to build a weapon that could vaporize a fleet of planes. It's both sad and magnificent, hilarious and haunting. Exactly the kind of bedtime paradox you didn't know you needed. Because if history is a stage, Nikola Tesla's final act was a one-man show, performed entirely in the dim corner of the New York hotel room, with an audience of feathers, blueprints, and ghosts of unbuilt machines. Let's set the scene. It's the 1930s. The world's gone slightly mad. Depression, dictators, radio dramas about Martians. Somewhere in all this noise, Nikola Tesla, once the darling of science, the man who made lightning dance for applause, is living alone in the Hotel New Yorker. He's 70-something, tall, thin, dressed like a misplaced magician, and carrying breadcrumbs in his pockets because he has a date with pigeons. Every evening he walks to Bryant Park or to his beloved flock near the library, and there, amid the cooing and flapping, he talks to them. Not just talks, converses like old colleagues. Some he recognizes individually. One, a particular white pigeon with gray-tipped wings and a small spot of light pink over her left eye, he calls his wife. Yes, his wife. Now, before you judge, remember this is Nikola Tesla, the man who once tried to wirelessly power the entire planet. If he says he's married to a pigeon, you at least have to give him the courtesy of listening to his vows. He said she was unlike any other bird, that she understood him, that when she was ill, he stayed up nights nursing her back to health. That one night she flew in through his window, and in her eyes he saw a beam of light, more intense than any I have ever produced with my laboratory lamps. When she died, he said, "Something went out of my life," and with that sentence the story of Nikola Tesla, prophet of electricity, became something stranger. A slow drift between brilliance and loneliness. A man who had given the world its light but lost his own. It's tempting to see this as tragedy, but there's also a kind of beauty in it. The last spark of an imagination that refused to obey gravity. Tesla had always been otherworldly. It's just that the world finally stopped trying to keep up. He once said that the Earth itself could be turned into a conductor, that energy could leap through the air like thoughts. He'd built towers to prove it, filled notebooks with equations that looked like poetry written by thunder. And now, in his hotel room, he dreamed of something new. Not to give light, but to control it, to focus it, to weaponize it. A death ray. But don't imagine explosions or comic book lasers. Tesla's version was pure, refined, the kind of apocalypse that only a polite genius could invent. He called it the Teleforce, a device that could send concentrated beams of particles through the free air, powerful enough to bring down 10,000 enemy planes at 250 miles. He insisted it wasn't for conquest but for peace. A weapon so terrible, he said, that war itself will become impossible. A lovely thought if you ignore the fact that the sentence begins with a weapon so terrible. Tesla described it in elegant mathematical terms. A narrow beam of death that could defend borders, protect cities, and, theoretically, make armies irrelevant. The governments of the world, or at least the ones who could afford to entertain geniuses in decline, listened politely, then quietly declined to invest. Still, he persisted. He wrote letters to the League of Nations, the British War Office, the US military, even to Joseph Stalin. "I can make you a death beam," he essentially said, "that will make everyone behave." Imagine getting that letter on Soviet stationery. Most ignored him. A few humored him. Some probably checked to make sure their office windows were pigeon-proof, and while the bureaucrats yawned, Tesla kept sketching, tinkering, dreaming. His notebooks filled with diagrams of vacuum chambers, particle accelerators, power converters. The weapon would cost $2 million, he estimated, the equivalent of about $40 million today, though he probably would have accepted breadcrumbs. Meanwhile, the Pigeons kept visiting. At night, as New York's skyline glowed with the electricity he'd once helped unleash, Tesla sat by his window and fed them. He said that sometimes, when he thought deeply, the pigeons would gather silently outside, as if they could sense his thoughts vibrating through the air. And honestly, knowing what we know about him, who's to say they couldn't? The man's brain was practically an antenna, but his fame, his fortune, and his physical health were fading. He'd once been the rival of Edison, the showman, of science, the wizard of the modern world. Now he was an old man in a hotel suite surrounded by unpaid bills, dreams of wireless energy and feathers. And yet, even in decline, he remained a legend. Newspapers would still publish his predictions, new ways to transmit power, to communicate, to see the unseen. Some headlines read like prophecies, others like science fiction. But beneath them all was the same current, a mind that never stopped, spinning, because Nikola Tesla, even when broke, alone, and feeding birds, was still thinking in lightning. By the time Nikola Tesla hit his 70s, the world had moved on from lightning bolts and dreamers with unbrushed hair. The radio was old news, airplanes were crossing oceans, and the word atomic had just started to sound like the future. Meanwhile, Tesla was still living in a room full of birds and unpaid laundry tickets, muttering about how no one understood his vision for a world wireless system. He wasn't entirely wrong. Nobody really did. You see, Tesla's mind worked like a cosmic radio, constantly tuned to frequencies no one else could hear. He'd talk about vibrations, about the Earth being like a bell that could be struck with just the right mathematical rhythm. He claimed he could transmit electricity through the air, that the entire planet was just waiting to become one big cooperative extension cord. And for a while, it seemed like he might actually pull it off. Back in the early 1900s, when optimism still wore a top hat, Tesla had begun building a colossal tower on Long Island, the Wardenclyffe Tower. It was meant to beam free energy across the world, an internet of electricity before the internet was even a glimmer in anyone's brain. But the money ran out, the investors fled, and the tower was eventually dismantled for scrap. That loss haunted him. Wardenclyffe was his cathedral, and its destruction was like God canceling the sermon. By the 1930s, Tesla had stopped chasing investors and started chasing ghosts. Not literal ghosts, though honestly with Tesla, it's always a possibility, but the ghost of recognition, the ghost of being right. The press still loved him in that slightly condescending way tabloids love a once famous genius who might be losing it. Every year on his birthday, they'd send reporters to his hotel suite to ask what new miracles he had planned for humanity. And Tesla, ever the performer, never disappointed. He'd tell them about cosmic rays that could power the world, about machines that could read thoughts, about a new system of energy so refined it could make any engine obsolete, and of course about his particle beam, his Teleforce weapon, which by now had upgraded from defensive system to guaranteed war ender. The journalists would nod politely, scribble notes, and then run headlines like, "Tesla promises death beam to end all war. Genius scientist claims he can destroy 10,000 airplanes with a single ray. Tesla still feeding pigeons." They never knew quite where the line was between prophecy and punchline. Neither did he. Because here's the thing, Nikola Tesla wasn't a madman. He was a perfectionist trapped in a world that preferred shortcuts. His ideas were often real, just 50 years early and 10 budgets short. He could see the future, but never afford it. When he talked about a global communication system, people rolled their eyes, then built the radio network. When he predicted handheld devices that could transmit messages instantly across continents, people called it madness, then invented smartphones. So when he mentioned a death ray, maybe, just maybe, the world should have paused. If only for a second. But by then, Tesla's brilliance had turned into a kind of theater. Part science, part myth, part lonely man in a fancy suit talking to birds. His habits had become legends in themselves. He demanded fresh towels daily, refused to shake hands with anyone, and insisted on using exactly 18 napkins to clean his silverware before eating. Numbers comforted him. 3, 6, and 9 were sacred. The key to the universe, he claimed. It sounds eccentric until you realize that the man probably saw math the way most people see God. He believed everything vibrated in patterns. People, buildings, entire planets. And that by understanding those vibrations, he could manipulate reality itself. In another life, Tesla might have been a mystic monk. In this one, he was a tired engineer with a notebook full of equations, and no one left to build them. And yet, despite the loneliness, despite the rejections and the headlines that treated him like a half-retired wizard, Tesla never really stopped. Creating every day, he wrote. Sketches, letters, blueprints. He described machines that could harvest energy from the upper atmosphere, generators that could pull power directly from sunlight, flying craft that moved without wings or propellers. He claimed he could build a device that would illuminate the oceans from their depths and communicate with planets. And then he'd say, with absolute seriousness, that his most important work was feeding the pigeons, because they needed him, and you cannot understand what it means to love a pigeon as I have loved her. He was half prophet, half poet, and 100% committed to the bit. And the world, terrified, tired, and teetering toward another world war, didn't know whether to laugh, listen, or take cover. Tesla, for his part, remained unbothered. The present is theirs, he once said. The future for which I really worked is mine. He wasn't wrong. Picture Nikola Tesla in his final decade. The tall, spectral figure gliding through the halls of the Hotel New Yorker in a black suit that's been pressed so many times, it's achieved geological layers. He's 80, maybe 81. Time has lost interest in counting. He carries a loaf of bread under one arm, a paper bag full of seeds under the other, and the glint of defiance still flickering in his eyes. He's broke, ignored, and, inconveniently for the skeptics, still brilliant. He spends mornings writing letters to heads of state, and afternoons feeding pigeons who seem more receptive than diplomats. Because by now, Tesla is on a mission, a final crusade to save humanity from itself with, naturally, an unstoppable beam of concentrated doom. But this wasn't a death ray the way pulp comics imagine it. No cackling villain, no disco laser, zapping mountains. Tesla's Teleforce weapon was mathematical, elegant, and deeply misunderstood. It was, as he described it, a beam of minute, high-velocity particles projected from an apparatus that could send concentrated energy to any point on the globe. In other words, imagine the universe's angriest flashlight. Tesla claimed it. Could melt engines, disable armies, and shoot down entire fleets of aircraft, all without the need for bombs or bullets. War, he promised, will become impossible, because nothing kills enthusiasm for invasion quite like the threat of instant vaporization. To fund it, he wrote to nearly everyone with a government seal and a stationary budget. To the British War Office, Your Majesty's forces would be rendered invincible. To the United States, for $2 million, I will build a wall of death around your coasts. To the Soviet Union, my beam will make your borders untouchable. Each letter was a masterpiece of confident madness. And remarkably, the Soviets showed interest. In 1937, Tesla reportedly met with a delegation from the Soviet Trade Commission to discuss his plans. They handed him $25,000 in today's money, pocket change for a superweapon, but enough to keep the pigeons fed and the dream alive. Of course, nothing tangible came of it. Tesla's lab notes hinted at progress. Something about vacuum chambers, tungsten emitters, and charged mercury particles. But no one ever saw a working prototype. He claimed it could focus energy so tightly that it would shoot down a squadron of 10,000 planes like swatting flies. Which is impressive, though one imagines the paperwork would be a nightmare. The military, ever polite but cautious, filed his proposals somewhere between fascinating and please don't let him near the Pentagon. Still, the image of Tesla building a death ray in his hotel room is irresistible. Picture him surrounded by blueprints, coffee cups, and half a dozen pigeons perched like disinterested lab assistants. Maybe he's calculating beam trajectories while one bird walks across his slide rule. Maybe he's muttering equations while another pecks at his shoelace. It's chaos, yes, but it's dignified chaos. And amid the absurdity, there's tragedy. Because Tesla genuinely believed this weapon would end all war. In his mind, it wasn't destruction. It was deterrence. Humanity would finally behave because it would have no choice. A peaceful apocalypse, powered by physics and moral exhaustion. The press caught wind of it, of course. Headlines blared. Tesla invents world-ending ray, says it will save mankind. Old Wizard claims to have secret beam of death. And just like that, the myth of the death ray entered pop culture. Cartoon villains would soon borrow it, sci-fi writers would romanticize it, and Cold War generals would quietly wish it were real. Meanwhile, Tesla continued to insist that he could make it work, if only someone would fund him properly. But no, one did. Instead, his life shrank to the confines of that hotel room, room 3327, where every sound, the hum of the city, the coo of a pigeon, the buzz of an electric fan, became part of his private symphony. He'd walk to Bryant Park in the mornings to feed the birds, then retreat to his notebooks in the evenings to design weapons for a world that had stopped calling. And yet, if you read those notebooks carefully, and some historians have, you can tell the death ray was only part of a much larger dream. Tesla wasn't just trying to make a weapon. He was trying to make proof that his mind hadn't betrayed him, that he still held the secret harmonies of the universe in his grasp. He wanted one last invention to remind everyone that he was right all along, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted to aim the beam skyward, to show that even in his last act he could still touch the stars, because Tesla didn't really crave destruction. He craved awe. He wanted the universe to be impressed, and if that required a death ray, well, so be it. By this point, Nikola Tesla had officially crossed that mysterious border between eccentric genius and that man who frightens the hotel staff. You know the type. Always impeccably dressed, always polite, always somehow feeding a pigeon. In the lobby while discussing interplanetary communication, he was, in the most literal sense, vibrating at a higher frequency than the rest of humanity. Because Tesla didn't just believe in electricity, he believed in vibration as the fundamental rhythm of the universe. Everything was frequency, he said, sound, thought, energy, emotion. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, he once declared, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And in his final years, those vibrations became his comfort, his theology, his private religion. He talked to reporters about invisible waves that could cure disease, about harmonics that could heal the mind, about machines that could vibrate matter into perfection. It sounded mystical, but Tesla was dead serious. He believed that if he could tune himself to the right frequency, he might literally live forever. And to be fair, this was the man who gave us alternating current, fluorescent lights, radio guidance, and the rotating magnetic field. If anyone was going to achieve immortality through vibes, it was him. His experiments, however, had grown stranger. At one point, he claimed to have built a small mechanical oscillator that could produce vibrations, so powerful they could shake entire buildings. He said he tested it in his lab, and the vibrations caused the structure to tremble violently, until, in a fit of alarm, He smashed the machine with a sledgehammer before the police arrived. "I could have split the earth in two," he bragged. The newspapers called it Tesla's earthquake machine, which, if you're keeping track, means that by this stage in his career he had accidentally invented the earthquake machine, allegedly invented a death ray, declared undying love for a pigeon. Frankly, that's a resume, but Tesla didn't see any of this as madness. To him, it was all part of a larger pattern, a kind of universal music that only he could hear. His pigeons, he claimed, could sense it too. He said that when he meditated or concentrated deeply, they would fall silent, that when he entered a certain state of resonance, they would gather closer, as though drawn by invisible strings of energy. He believed the white pigeon, his favorite, his wife, was a conduit of purity, an angelic presence. He once told a journalist that he loved her as a man loves a woman, but that their connection was spiritual, not physical. When she died in his arms, he said, "A light came from her eyes, powerful, blinding light, and I knew my life's work was finished. That's either the saddest thing you've ever heard or the greatest metaphor for burnout in history." But behind that poetic image, behind the pigeons and the eccentricities, was a man who'd given everything to the idea that the universe was knowable, that its mysteries could be solved with enough patience and math. And as the years went on, that conviction isolated him. He became wary of other scientists, suspicious of industry, convinced that shadowy forces were suppressing his inventions. He told acquaintances that his papers had been stolen, that spies were watching him, which, to be fair, may not have been entirely untrue. When you spend decades proposing death beams to world governments, you're bound to make a few people curious. But Tesla's paranoia had another layer to it. He believed his own thoughts could be intercepted. He described telepathic interference, invisible currents that distorted his focus. To block them, he'd place mirrors around his workspace and angle them to reflect harmful rays away from his mind, which, honestly, sounds like every modern open-plan office. Yet through it all, his routines remained disciplined, almost ritualistic. He walked exactly 8 to 10 miles a day. He dined alone at the same time every evening. He slept only 2 hours a night, insisting that he could recharge by entering a state of creative trance. He would never touch another person. Contact, he said, contaminates the purity of vibration. So he lived in immaculate solitude, his life reduced to equations, letters, and birds. The hotel staff adored him in that worried sort of way. He was unfailingly kind, always tipped well, and never complained, except when someone disturbed his pigeons. Sometimes when the weather was bad, he'd pay the bellboys to keep the windows open so the pigeons could come in and rest in his room. Imagine walking into an 80-year-old man's suite, expecting to deliver a towel and finding him discussing aerodynamics with a flock. He had become a myth that refused to realize it was mythical. But here's the thing. Even in his strangest years, Tesla's brain still worked. His notes from this period are full of designs that would later prove feasible. Directed energy weapons, vertical takeoff aircraft, wireless power transmission. He wasn't wrong, just untimely. The world had caught up to Edison, but it would take another century to catch up to Tesla. And so he lived in that quiet purgatory between recognition and irrelevance, surrounded by feathers and formulas, dreaming of a light so pure that it could erase darkness forever. He once said, "The day when we shall know exactly what electricity is will mark an epoch in human progress." He didn't live to see that day, but he certainly illuminated the path toward it. In the winter of 1943, New York City was cold in the way that feels personal. The kind of cold that seeps into your thoughts and politely suggests that maybe, just maybe, you've lived long enough. Nikola Tesla was 86 years old, still living, in room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker, a room he'd occupied for nearly a decade. His rent was covered by Westinghouse, a quiet gesture of guilt and gratitude from the company that had once profited off his genius and then watched him fade into poverty. He still took his daily walks to feed the pigeons, though slower now. The bellhops had grown protective of him. The maids were instructed never to disturb his experiments, which, by this stage, meant mostly notebooks, piles of correspondence, and a few mysterious boxes that everyone referred to with the same careful reverence people usually reserve for cursed artifacts. Tesla had become a ghost that tipped well. Each morning he'd wake at 3 a.m., meditate, write, and occasionally announce to no one in particular that he was on the verge of a great discovery. Then he'd go back to calculating, sketching, and feeding birds. The line between invention and ritual had disappeared completely. And yet, even in decline, the myth kept expanding. The papers still wrote about him. He'd announce a new project, a machine to transmit unlimited power, a ray to end all war, a method to communicate with other planets. And the journalists would show up, not because they believed him, but because they wanted to. Tesla was no longer just a scientist. He was folklore in a suit. But behind the myth was a lonely man with failing health and a growing sense that time was running out. He still talked about his Teleforce weapon, the death ray, claiming he could finish it if only someone would provide the funding. No one did. Even as the world plunged into World War II, no government seemed eager to hand millions of dollars to an 86-year-old man who fed pigeons and believed he could end all war with a light beam. Still, rumors swirled that Tesla had developed plans for a superweapon, that he'd hidden prototypes in his room, that he was sitting on technology powerful enough to alter the war itself. And then, one cold morning, January 7th, 1943, Tesla was found dead, alone. The maid, who discovered him, said the "Do Not Disturb" sign had been on his door for 2 days. When no one answered her knocking, she entered to find him lying peacefully on his bed, fully dressed, his hands folded on his chest. He was 86. His pigeons, waiting outside in the cold, would never see him again. Within hours, the government arrived. The Office of Alien Property Custodian, an agency with a name that sounds like it was invented by a nervous screenwriter, seized all of Tesla's belongings. Every notebook, every letter, every mysterious box. Because, of course, this was America was at war, and the last thing the U.S. government was going to ignore was the death of a man who'd spent the past decade claiming to have built a beam that could destroy cities. The FBI called in a specialist to examine Tesla's papers, a man named Dr. John G. Trump. Yes, that Trump, the uncle of a future president. Dr. Trump was an electrical engineer from MIT, and after several days of sorting through the labyrinth of diagrams, theories, and what we might generously call creative physics, he declared that Tesla's papers contained nothing of significant practical value, which was probably true, and also somehow suspiciously convenient, because within those same files were hints of ideas far beyond their time: directed energy, particle acceleration, wireless transmission. Things that, coincidentally, would reappear decades later in military research and science fiction alike. So either Tesla was wrong, or he was so right that everyone quietly borrowed his homework. When the government finally released the files years later, some were missing, others were redacted. And so, naturally, the legend of Tesla's missing death ray plans was born. According to some accounts, he'd hidden the final piece of his invention, the crucial blueprint, somewhere secret, to prevent it from being misused. Others claimed that the Soviets had already stolen it. Some said it never existed at all, that the death ray was just the fever dream of an old man who couldn't stop inventing stories when the world stopped listening. But myths have a way of refusing to die, especially when they involve geniuses, governments, and lasers. And Tesla, who had once dreamed of wireless power for all humanity, became, in death, the perfect symbol for every lost invention, every suppressed idea, every whispered theory that maybe, just maybe, the real story was too big to fit in a newspaper column. His funeral was held at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, attended by a few hundred mourners, including scientists, dignitaries, and, somewhere outside, probably a pigeon or two perched on the windowsill. He was cremated, and his ashes placed in a spherical urn of his own design, because of course they were, now displayed in the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. The urn, fittingly, looks like a miniature planet, as though even in death he wanted to remind Zeus that he still believed the Earth could hum with infinite power. After Tesla's death, something strange happened. Stranger than the pigeon thing, stranger than the death ray. Stranger even than a man living for years in a New York hotel room full of confidential oscillations. The world forgot him, for a time anyway. In 1943, America was far too busy dropping real bombs to worry about hypothetical ones made of light. Einstein and the Manhattan Project had stolen the spotlight. The newspapers ran a few obituaries, most of them polite, but lukewarm, the kind that say, eccentric inventor dies instead of demigod ascends. His pigeons were scattered, his possessions boxed up, his notes quietly classified. The man who once imagined illuminating the entire planet without a single wire had faded into obscurity, remembered only by a handful of engineers and a few loyal dreamers. But the thing about Nikola Tesla is that he was never designed to stay dead. His ideas were too wild, too cinematic, too memeable. He was basically a superhero origin story waiting for the internet. And sure enough, the legend began to resurrect itself piece by piece. At first, it was the scientists, a generation of physicists, electrical engineers, and radio pioneers who had grown up idolizing him, began to name-drop Tesla's theories again. They rediscovered his patents, marveled at his prescience, and occasionally muttered things like, "Wait, he thought of this in 1899? Then came the conspiracy theorists, because where there are missing files and mysterious inventions, there are always men in sunglasses whispering into cassette recorders. According to one theory, Tesla's death ray plans were never missing at all. They were classified, hidden by the US government, and later adapted into Cold War weapons programs. Another claimed that Tesla had developed anti-gravity propulsion technology, tested secretly in Colorado, and that his research was the true origin of modern UFO sightings. And, naturally my favorite, the theory that Tesla didn't die in 1943 at all, but was taken by his friends from Venus, because apparently even aliens have good taste in inventors. Meanwhile, artists, writers, and musicians started to rediscover him. In the 1960s and 70s, Tesla became a kind of cultural ghost. David Bowie played him on stage. Science fiction authors turned him into a wizard of lightning. Comic books portrayed him battling Thomas Edison in epic duels of alternating current versus direct current, the most passive-aggressive energy feud in history. By the 1990s, the resurrection was complete. Tesla became the patron saint of misunderstood geniuses, the man who was right too soon, the lonely visionary who dreamed of a utopia powered by free energy and died feeding pigeons in a hotel room because capitalism wasn't ready for him. The internet, bless its chaotic heart, adopted him as one of its founding myths. Memes sprouted, like alternating current weeds, Tesla zapping Edison, Tesla predicting Wi-Fi, Tesla communing with space. Was half of it exaggerated? Absolutely. Was it deserved? Oh, entirely. Because even stripped of the myths, the truth was astonishing enough. This was a man who imagined drones before flight, radio before radio, neon before Las Vegas, and clean energy before most people had. Stopped lighting things on fire for power. And yes, he was weird. But greatness and weirdness have a long, happy marriage. Modern culture loves to call Tesla a mad scientist, but that phrase feels too cheap. He wasn't mad, he was devout. He believed in ideas the way monks believe in prayer. He gave his sanity, his fortune, his health, and ultimately his heart. to a white pigeon and to a vision of a world united by invisible energy, which honestly makes him sound like a prophet who accidentally invented the power grid. Even the corporations that once ignored him eventually came calling. His name now adorns electric cars, tech companies, space projects, and pop culture Easter eggs from cartoons to prestige films. The man who died penniless became an empire posthumously, and somewhere, one imagines him smiling faintly, not out of pride, but because it was the most efficient use of energy. But perhaps the most beautiful irony of all is this: the world that forgot him now runs on his dreams. Every flickering phone, every glowing screen, every burst of wireless signal is a quiet echo of Tesla's vision of a world humming in invisible connection. He once wrote, "The present is theirs. The future for which I really worked is mine." And he was right, entirely uncomfortably right. Still, the question remains: was Tesla's end tragic or transcendent? Did he die a lonely, deluded man whispering to pigeons, or a visionary who'd simply walked too far ahead of the century that followed him? The answer, as with most good legends, is probably both. He was both prophet and punchline, both scientist and mystic, both the man who built the future and the man who couldn't pay his hotel bill. And maybe that's why we love him. Because, in a world obsessed with efficiency, Tesla reminds us that sometimes the most human thing you can do is be beautifully, chaotically inefficient in pursuit of something impossible. It turns out that Nikola Tesla, despite dying alone in a hotel room, is having a very busy afterlife. His ghost is everywhere, humming in light bulbs, trending in hashtags, appearing in superhero movies, and occasionally being invoked by tech billionaires with suspicious haircuts. There's something magnetic about the man. Pun intended, unfortunately. He was the perfect storm of brilliance, tragedy, mystery, and mimetic potential. It's as though he was born knowing he'd someday be ideal for a podcast thumbnail. Let's start with his afterlife in science. You can find Tesla's fingerprints on nearly every modern technology that hums, glows, or transmits without a wire. Alternating current? That's him. Radio transmission? He was there before Marconi. Fluorescent lighting, X-rays, remote controls, even early drones. All Tesla's babies, or at least his very enthusiastic stepchildren. Wireless power transfer, his lifelong dream, is now being tested for everything from electric cars to kitchen gadgets. Somewhere, deep in the ether, Tesla's spirit is doing a smug little dance that can probably be measured in megahertz. But Tesla's true resurrection came not in the lab, but online. The internet found him, dusted him off, and declared him one of its own. Suddenly, this lonely old man who once fed pigeons in Manhattan was a digital saint, a symbol of the genius unappreciated in his time, a glowing, tragic, meme-powered folk hero for every nerd who ever felt misunderstood. He became the subject of endless what-if debates. What if Tesla's inventions hadn't been suppressed? What if he'd beaten Edison? What if we all had free energy, global Wi-Fi, and a personal death ray by now? It's an irresistible fantasy, one that turns the story of science into a moral parable about purity versus greed, dreamers versus businessmen, idealists versus patent trolls. In this story, Tesla is the idealist. Edison, of course, is the villain. Now, history is rarely that tidy. Edison was ruthless, sure, but he was also practical. Tesla, meanwhile, was a visionary who sometimes forgot to eat. But the internet isn't really interested in nuance. It likes its myths clean and its heroes tragic, and so Tesla became the patron saint of underdogs. Every ambitious college dropout, every Reddit engineer, every person with a prototype and a grudge could see themselves in him. He was proof that brilliance and weirdness could coexist, that sometimes the world is too small for your ideas, and that when all else fails, you can still talk to pigeons and be remembered forever. Of course, his legend also attracted the usual chorus of conspiracy theories. To this day, you can find entire YouTube channels devoted to decoding Tesla's secret 369 code, as though he left behind a mystical recipe for unlocking the universe. There are forums claiming his lost papers contained anti-gravity technology, time travel formulas, or methods for extracting cosmic energy from the void, which, to be fair, is exactly what I'd want people saying about me 80 years after my death. Then there's the irony of the century, a certain electric car company named after him. You know the one. A company whose existence ensures that every time someone tweets Tesla changed the world, at least one person has to clarify, no, not that Tesla. It's fitting, in a cosmic way, that his name now zips around highways instead of lightning bolts. He dreamed of wireless power. Now, his namesake burns rubber with lithium batteries and questionable autopilot settings. Progress is weird. But if you peel away the memes, the myths, and the billionaire cosplay, there's something deeply poetic about Tesla's cultural immortality. He wanted to connect the world through invisible forces. He wanted to make light universal and communication effortless. And now, that's exactly how his story spreads. Through glowing screens and wireless signals, transmitted through the very medium he imagined. Tesla once said, "Let the future tell the truth, and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishments. The present is theirs. The future for which I really worked is mine." He was right. The future did tell the truth, or at least the kind of truth that makes for excellent internet content. And maybe that's all he ever wanted. Not statues, not titles, but a world alive with light and noise, alive with energy, alive with the vibration of his ideas. It's strange, though. For a man who believed in pure logic, Tesla's legacy feels almost spiritual. He's become a mythological figure, a kind of secular saint of science, equal parts Da Vinci, Prometheus, and tragic poet. When people light up a Tesla coil today, they're not just doing a science demo. They're invoking a little ritual. Sparks fly, thunder cracks, and for a brief second you can almost feel the same thrill he must have felt when he first bent lightning to his will. That's the real immortality. Not fame, not fortune, but resonance. The kind of echo that keeps humming long after the man is gone. And Tesla hums still. And now, dear dreamer, we drift toward the end of our tale, the quiet, flickering half-light where history becomes legend, and legend becomes a bedtime story. Nikola Tesla lived and died chasing a dream so radiant that it sometimes burned him. He spent his life trying to bottle lightning, and in the process he became a lightning bolt himself. Brilliant, unpredictable, and very bad for nearby buildings. He never married, never built a family, never owned much beyond his notebooks, and a modest wardrobe that could blind an onlooker with its precision. His true loves were currents, frequencies, and one particularly photogenic pigeon. But Tesla was never meant for small joys. He didn't seek company. He sought understanding. He wanted to decode the cosmos, not merely inhabit it. That's a lonely calling, the kind that makes people mutter genius and madman in the same breath. When he fed the pigeons, people saw an eccentric old man surrounded by feathers. But to Tesla, those birds were proof that energy, life, flows everywhere in every form. He saw divinity in motion, grace in flight, and something eternal in the hum of wings. He once said that all his inventions were anticipations of nature. He didn't think of himself as a creator, but as a translator, trying to speak the language of the universe through sparks and gears. And if that meant being misunderstood, well, that was a small price for a man who could literally make thunder. Doors. But here's the strange comfort. For all his brilliance, Tesla was human. He got lost in daydreams. He obsessed over tiny details. He felt betrayed, underappreciated, heartbroken. He laughed rarely but sincerely. And when he looked at the night sky, he saw not emptiness but potential, endless frequencies waiting to be tuned. In a way, he was the ultimate bedtime storyteller. His tales were not of dragons and castles, but of electric fairies and invisible, forces of worlds connected by light and resonance. He promised that one day we would speak across oceans without wires, see across continents, and draw power from the air itself. And somehow, we did. Every time you charge your phone wirelessly, every time Wi-Fi hums invisibly through the air, you are, without realizing it, participating in Tesla's lullaby for the future. His pigeons are gone. His notebooks are archived. His name has been borrowed by cars, coils, companies, and countless YouTube thumbnails. Yet his dream remains as alive as ever, that humanity might one day live in harmony with its own brilliance, that we might use our light without burning ourselves in it. Perhaps that's why his story fits so perfectly here, on Sleepy Dreamer, in America. Because Tesla's life was one long, luminous dream, half genius, half absurd comedy, entirely human. A dream of progress, of peace, of pigeons, and of possibilities too vast to measure. And though he died alone in that quiet hotel room, maybe, just maybe, he wasn't lonely. Maybe in his final moments, surrounded by the faint hum of the city's electricity, he realized that the world itself was finally beginning to vibrate at his frequency. So sleep easy, dreamer. The lights above you, the hum of your devices, the soft buzz of power in the walls. All of it is Tesla's heartbeat, still pulsing through the modern night. The man who loved a pigeon and invented the future never really left us. He just changed form, from flesh and bone to resonance and rhythm. And somewhere between the static and the silence, you can almost hear him whisper, "Everything is energy. Everything is vibration. Everything is connected." Good night, Nikola Tesla, and good night, dreamer. May your thoughts tonight travel far, humming quietly through the air, just as he imagined.